can humor me for a minute, I need to make a clarification about the last episode, because I be having conversations with people that remind me that reconstructionism has been a response to a real problem that I have recently been exposed to again, that make me think for just a split second, maybe there is something to reconstructionism. And then I remember, no, they are cancer. But let me just go into that world real quick, because the problem with the boundary situation, I was specifically talking about boundaries between individual people and individual people. If you cannot keep your fiscal responsibility for yourself and your family because there's an individual that is crossing that line for you, there are times that a boundary is appropriate, which means that you will not allow them to get close enough to ruin your ability to handle that first responsibility. I was not saying that you can now decide, oh, a situation is too difficult. I don't like this situation that I'm in, even though I've sworn an oath, or I've made a promise to someone, or I've taken on a responsibility that I must fulfill in my life unto a larger corporate or community end, and now I'm just going to drop everything because it's too hard, or because I'm tired, or because I'm not home as much as I'd like, or because I'm emotionally drained. You know what? Welcome to being alive. I don't buy that as a valid excuse. The Bible says, swear unto your own hurt. Meaning, if you make a promise, you gotta keep it, even if you didn't count the costs. And that's an interesting thing, too. Because people say, well, you need to count the cost before you fight this fight, or take on this responsibility, whether or not it's worth it. Whether or not it's worth it to do. That could be one way to look at it. Could also be, why don't you discover how much you need and then obtain that and then spend it? Don't just decide, oh, well, I don't want to put that effort into it, so I'm not going to handle it. You know what I'm saying? Like, there are situations in life where you gotta just have some balls, man. Because it's an interesting thing. When it comes to, like, military families and fathers that are overseas, I mean, sometimes mothers, but fathers in this case, we're all conservative here. Nobody really says, oh, well, they're not taking care of their family. But they're physically not present, and it's emotionally draining more than a lot of people will ever realize, but nobody bashes them for that. So that's okay. Yet, sometimes, many times, there's a lot less on the home front that is sacrificed before someone's like, yeah, I've sacrificed too much. Oh, really? You're going to back out now? You know what I'm saying? So I'm not going to spend this whole episode of boundaries, but I did want to clarify something, because there is a lot that needs to happen before deeming something impossible to take care of your first responsibility. You know? People throw it around like, oh, well, I need to put a boundary up because it's hard. Like, no. That's what the recons are annoyed at. And I'm annoyed at it too. That's what makes it very difficult for someone like me who didn't have a concept of healthy boundaries to be able to figure out when it's healthy to do. Because most people like the idea of boundaries because it's the weasel way out of things they just don't want to deal with. That's not it. So we'll move on from that now because we've already dealt with that. But just for my own, had to say it. Actually, I'm going to back up again. As far as cutting even people out, you still can't cut them out for good. We don't have the luxury of that. I wish we did. But if you say, all right, consequences for your actions, I cannot handle my first responsibilities at home, you and I need to have a break. It is not, I'm going to cut you off and I don't care if you change and you become the best person in the world, I still won't be around you. That you don't have that luxury. I say luxury because, again, according to the flesh, it'd be nice to do. So you can't even do that. We're not called to do that. It doesn't line up with Scripture. You have to leave a way where they can actually genuinely change. Most times they probably won't because there's patterns, you know. But you still have to have the mindset that that's a possibility because God does sometimes work miracles, you know, beyond what you think is comprehensible. So even then, your boundary is not a hard and fast line if certain things happen later. So now I think I'm done. Let's move on. There is a, I guess I want to say like Pentecostal charismatic version of the reconstructionists. Usually reconstructionism is the term that you hear for the Baptist and Presbyterian circles, maybe some others. But I actually just recently learned in the last couple of months a new term, or actually it's an old term, but I didn't know, for basically the same thing, probably a couple pegs shy of how crazy reconstructionism is, but basically the same thing for the Pentecostal charismatic, more liberal side of Christendom. And I think that's, look at me using Christendom, that's a recon word, but I mean, whatever, it's not terrible. It's called the Seven Mountains Mandate. Have you heard of it? I've got it here. Yeah, the Seven Mountain Mandate is the idea that there are 7 aspects of the world that we need to influence in order for the world to be transformed for Christ. Those 7 things are education, religion, family, business, government/the military, arts and entertainment, and the media. And a lot of times they take it from Isaiah 2:2, which says, like, in the last days, the mountains, everybody will flock to the mountains, stream to it, and all of that. The Lord's temple will be on the mountain. Also loosely based on the Abrahamic covenant, I'll make you the head and not the tail, which is something that I have heard so often in Reconstructionism. So it was actually very interesting to me to see that there was like a parallel thing for different denominations. I just thought, I have said, like, Reconstructionism is kind of like mostly in Presbyterian and Baptist circles, but it also extends to others. I thought the term would have been Reconstructionism, but apparently once you get to like Pentecostal charismatic and some others, it's called the Seven Mountains Mandate. So that was just actually very interesting. It's the same thing. I've read some articles where the Seven Mountains Mandate, they say, is like not as far gone as people who adhere to the Dominion Mandate in Reconstructionism, but I don't really see much of a difference. But I think because the people who hold to Reconstructionism are far more brazen, then culturally it's worse. But a couple very interesting things I'm going to read to you about the parallels. So here's something that the article says. The term Seven Mountain Mandate was coined by Lance Wallnau, and that's one of the prominent teachers there. Wallnau adapts the missionary mandate of Jesus to his disciples to go and make disciples of all nations, which is literally where Reconstructionism gets theirs too, so it's very parallel. Wallnau reasons that since churches already have a presence in every nation in the world, we need to now concentrate on influencing the systems, the mountains, within these nations. The problem, according to Wallnau, is that Christians are not currently influencing society outside the church. Christians have left the mountains susceptible to the gates of hell, which are spiritual portals over the kings, or influence shapers of those mountains. And, like, again, that's exactly what Reconstructionism says. It's like, yeah, the four-wall ghetto. Oh, I'm sorry. Pause. There's another thing I have to I mentioned in the Tactical Recon episodes, the author said four-walled ghetto fiefdom. It's fiefdom, but he spelled it fiefdom, and I hadn't heard of fiefdom or fiefdom, so when I looked up fiefdom, I didn't notice that it auto-corrected the spelling to fiefdom as I was reading it, so I still pronounced it fiefdom. I feel like a real idiot. I know fiefdom now means area of influence, which is why the estate of land thing that I said made sense, but I was like, I released that episode, I'm like, oh, it's fiefdom, and I was just like so in the zone about it, saying it was spelled fiefdom. Okay, but it's fiefdom. And that's like, okay, yeah, estate of land, but it's like area of influence is like how it's broadly termed. But I still don't understand the ghetto part. So I'm still right. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. So I'm sorry. I just had to say that too because I listened to it afterwards. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. It wasn't supposed to say fiefdom. It was supposed to say fiefdom, but he can't spell. Kind of like when he said comma for coma. Anyway, all right. Very similar. Seven Mountains Mandate and Reconstructionism. And then the article about this is Christians should be involved in the arts and the business and the government and the media, etc. We need more believers in the area. The message of the gospel must permeate everywhere. And I've said that too, yes. But one caveat to the Seven Mountain Mandate is that the Lord can do his work any way that he sees fit. We have no direct command in Scripture to seek positions of influence in society, only that we make disciples and be Jesus' witnesses in all the world. That is very interesting too. Like, the Bible says nothing about seek areas of influence. It talks about, like, influence people where you are. I don't know, I think I said this before. Teaching them to do whatsoever things I command you, as far as the dominion mandate in Matthew, it's after teaching them and baptizing them. So, like, your first priority is the discipleship, and then you can move on to and now emulate God and his word and Jesus' example through these means, because now you've already got the motivation to follow God out of love. So, yeah, anyway. So, that is very, very insightful. God may use anyone regardless of how high on the mountain he or she is. And in fact, God has specifically chosen the lowly. That's what this article is saying. And then 1 Corinthians 1:26 through 29 says, I don't know what translation this is, but it says, not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were influential. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. And that's very true. Like, people don't get it. So that's the same exact problems with Seven Mountains Mandate as Reconstructionism. It's just different denominations with different coins of phrases. And then it says, and this is where it's like the sometimes Seven Mountain Mandate drifts into the realm of dominion theology, which is worse in this. The idea is it's worse because Seven Mountains is like one tier less. Because it says the dominion theology is the belief that God desires Christians to rise to power and govern the nation according to biblical precepts. Whereas it looks like the Seven Mountain Mandate is just like climb as far as you can get. You may or may not get to the top, but do the best you can. Dominion Mandate Reconstructionists are going to say, no, you're actually not good enough until you do get to the top, because it's the only way you can really influence. So Seven Mountains is not quite as visceral, volatile. It's all like, okay, these institutions with people that are wicked in them, like, they will be changed if we influence the materialism around them and just force the movies to say the message we want. It's like the material thing is going to reflect Christ. Or like the government is, we're going to have laws that reflect Christ. So like the laws, the material thing will reflect Jesus and be his image bearer. Or art, or the education system will pray in school. It's almost like they're expecting material things to be what reflects Christ. They don't care about the people. So that's the same thing as Reconstructionism. It's never about the people. It doesn't matter about the people. And I've got 3 stories here that I wanted to share with you to illustrate the point. People are sacrificed on the altar of influence for Christ. Like what's the point of influencing people if you don't like the people you're influencing? Like, as a creation. If you don't like human beings, why do you care to influence and bring the gospel to them? What I mean is like here, the story. When I was a little girl, I was always into music. I play piano. I was always composing and doing all this stuff, right? And so my mom has a brilliant idea that I could take Bible verses, and I think it was actually like in a particular like old reader, like how to learn the alphabet, and it was like A is for the verse, all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. B is for this verse. And it's like an old thing. I think like a McGuffey's primer or something. I forget. But she was like, what if you made each of these and put a tune to it so you could remember it better? Great. Except that's not what she said. She said, what if you put it to a tune and then we can write out the notes and make a book out of it and sell it and influence people in the community so they can learn the alphabet according to, like, with the scripture verse. Which, again, is still not bad, but it wasn't, like, just for my education anymore. And I was like, still, okay, sure. So I go in my room, I got my little keyboard, and I'm, like, tinkering away. I must have been, like, I wasn't a teenager yet, 11, 12. And what I was discovering is that the verses were just not long enough to make a composition. I was into compositions, and I wanted to do musical excellence because that was my thing. So for the first one, All Have Sinned and Come Short, I did my little thing, whatever, and I made a little thing, and it was like repeated sometimes because I wanted to be a little longer, and Mom liked that one. But some other ones that I started to B, C, and D, she started not to like those because I was adding embellishment slash like the gist of the verse because of like I needed certain meter, I needed certain like syllables that were accented versus not accented to make the composition make sense. And so it wasn't exactly like KJV anymore. Like D was deliver us from evil, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory, which is weird to me because it didn't even start with the letter D. They had to like start in the middle of the verse to get the D out of it, and there were probably other verses in the world, in the Bible that started with actual D, which is also a thing I was annoyed at, but that's going far afield. So I was like, well, you're already starting with a verse that doesn't start with the letter D for D, so if I want to say deliver us from evil, deliver us from all the sin, and then continue on with the verse, for thine is the kingdom and the power too, and the glory of the Lord, or whatever, glory forever. Whatever, I was adding some words in there, which, I raise you CCM, you're gonna add principles sometimes, right? Mom didn't like that. She said, well, this can't be used in the book we're doing because it's not the actual thing. And I'm like, the book that we're doing, or the book that you're doing, or the book that like we at large is doing, or like maybe we could have said, that's a good composition. I understand that you enjoy creativity, and I don't want to squash that. So if you want to do two, because I still have this great idea that we can have like a little booklet, but it would, in order for that to work, we'd have to have it more with the Bible verse. But it's not like your creativity is bad because it doesn't fit this reconstructionist mandate idea, which is what I got. And I kind of got the whole, well, you're trying to change the Bible now. And it just became this big thing. And I'm like, I'm like little. I'm like, I just want to write good music. But I, as the individual, didn't meet the Dominion mandate at that moment. So what was the point? Like, in hindsight, what was the point of caring so much about influencing people, random people you don't know, with these little Bible verse jingles that you wanted me to do for you? But, me, the person who's doing it, I have a particular drive and passion that God gave me, and that cannot be encouraged when it comes head to head with the Dominion mandate. You see where that's going? Does that make sense to you? And it was just like the constant, like, you cannot enjoy being alive. Like, I know I'm making that particular jump. It's not obvious in this story. But, like, it was all the death by a thousand cuts in that kind of way. So, like, here's another thing, another cut to, like, paint the picture. For a writing project in school, I'm very good at writing. I was very good at a young age. I was 11. I don't know why everything happened when I was 11. I feel like every time I say that, I was 11 years old. I was like, well, it was around that time. And I think it was because I was actually like noticing it getting into my teenage years that something was off. Maybe that's why a lot of stuff stuck out, but maybe not. I don't know. I wrote this analogy because in school I was learning about what an analogy was versus a metaphor and all of that kind of thing in writing and imagery. And so in my creative writing, I wrote out a little analogy. And the analogy was about a little boy named Sam who is at a swimming party with his friends in the pool at the friend's house. And the kids decide they want to make a whirlpool, which literally every child my age thought that was like the cat's meow at the time. So you go around the edge of the pool and you just make it until like the current takes you, right? And all the kids were like, yeah, okay, which direction? Okay, we'll go clockwise. Okay, we'll go. And so they're going along, and Sam's like, after a while, he's like, wait a second. We're not going clockwise. We're going counterclockwise. Like, this isn't right. Well, what the heck? And so he's like, guys, we're going the wrong direction. And they're like, oh, it doesn't even matter at this point. Just go. He's like, no, we made a choice. And of course, like, it's an analogy. No, who cares? The kid's not going to do this in real life. But he starts going the opposite direction. And everyone's like, come on, you're in my way. Stop. Go the right way. He's like, but this is the right way. Da-da. And then, of course, the analogy, one by one, the kids start actually turning around and going his direction until they actually finally go the correct way, clockwise. And like the moral of the analogy, if you're doing it by yourself, just keep at it and like whatever. Yeah, I'm sure you can draw how obvious that analogy is in your own conclusions. So, of course, my parents thought that was just so amazing because that was like right in line with, yeah, you stay the course, you're reformed, like your reconstructionism kind of stuff, and you're going to be the in the minority, but you one by one, people are going to see your influence. They're going to just like take over the world. And I named the story The World Pool as a play on words, and they just thought it was the most brilliant thing in the whole world, and it was just so amazing and all this stuff. Well, fast forward a little while later, there was a poetry contest that came up. And, it was like, I don't know, in the paper, I don't know how we found out. I think it was in a local paper. It was like, okay, yeah, cash prizes, whatever. And you submit your poetry. Now, I have also written many poems when I was little. And I was going to pick one of those because they were my poems. But my parents wanted me to make this allegory, this analogy, it was actually allegory, into a poem. And I was like, but it's not. I have like description, I have dialogue, and like, it's a story. I don't want to make it a poem. I said, but it's such a good message, and we need to get the message out. And if people read it in the poetry contest, then they'll get the message and the influence and all of the language you'd expect. Like, fine. Not the fact that I was wanting to put in a poem based on my own creativity about something else. No, doesn't count. So I make up their poem for them out of this, and it was like really short, and I was annoyed, but I did it because clearly I was told that was the more glorifying thing for God in that moment, because it was such a good message, and my other poems didn't really hold a candle to it. It doesn't stop there, because you could also submit like a photo of yourself, like, about the author, if you were to win the prize, so that you're featured. So there were different things you could do. You could submit a photograph of yourself. You could submit a little bio, like some of your hobbies, like, she lives, I live with my parents in a farm or whatever, Virginia, and you could do that. You can also submit a dedication. A lot of people did that in the contest if they were writing like in memory of poems. And there was something else that they could also do. But there were like 4 things. If you won, then this would be featured. And I am thinking, I want people to know me and know about the person who wrote the poem, which I didn't even want to write. I'd like to send a picture and a bio. And then they could know something about me, because I want human connection. But no, because that doesn't go with the mandate. That doesn't go with Reconstructionism. Nobody cares. Nobody cares what you look like. They just want to have the message in front of them. And they shouldn't care. They shouldn't care about that. They shouldn't care about bios, because it doesn't matter what your hobbies are as long as you have the right theology. It doesn't matter what you like to do in your free time. You should dedicate this to your parents who helped you write it instead. Because that's what a good daughter would do, and then it shows how close you are to your family. Do you remember that whole thing I told you about, the whole, like, kid got smacked for, oh, is the party over? I have to go home now, because the mother had to look like a good mother. That wasn't my mother. But my mother's doing, it all a little same colors here. You should write a dedication so that if you're chosen to win this, they can see that your theology comes from a strong familial relationship that you have. Because that's reconstructing the family. Because not a lot of people have good parents. And not a lot of people are raised in a Christian home. Yeah, that was a thing. And that's what I did. It's like, oh yeah, people don't really want to know who I am. It's a poem contest. I didn't even win. But, like, how does that make a child feel growing up in these kinds of situations and Reconstructionism, where you as an individual really don't matter? Your creativity, your inclinations, your passions, you as a person that God created with certain likes and dislikes, and nobody wants to get to know that, because you just have to be these input-outputs kind of thing, because we are expendable. Nobody cares how you look. Nobody cares what you enjoy. You have to just write what we need to influence to that degree. We can't influence people with what the Spirit would give us as tools to influence. Like, what if I chose a different poem and it touched someone's life and nobody knew about it? That's influence. Other things are influence too, but you can't poo-poo that kind of thing, So yeah, that was real life. And the thing about, like, it's not just me, it's not just my weird stories, and I have a jillion of them, but recently a older couple that left a recon church and joined another church that they really, really like, and it's doing really well for them, and they're really nice people. I've noticed they're not the only ones. Another person I know, but like a couple people who have left the recon groups, they end up having this very weird relationship with the concept of prayer. And I've talked about prayer and how it was very hard, and still is very hard, for me to pray and know, like, am I saying the right thing? Should I say this? Should I say that? Should I desire this? Should I pray for it? And, like, there's all this, like, no relationship at all, And yes, there's something to be said about, pray in accordance with God's will. Like, you're not gonna just, oh God, I wish you would kill this person, like, if it's wicked, a wicked thing to desire. Like, you need to check yourself at the door, but that's for coming to the Lord in confession as well. It's not just because you want to look clean for God when you pray. It's interesting about their new relationship with prayer. For the elderly couple I just mentioned, they started, it's not a bad thing, it's just like I'm working through it, but just to give you an idea, asking for a lot of prayer about things that I guess a recon might call random. So, like, I think I've mentioned once, there's like a hierarchy of prayer. I'm not allowed to pray for my paper cut when, like, someone's sick or something like that, because, like, oh, well, you're not as important. And it's like a hierarchy when God is everywhere all the time. He can heal you and the other person at the same time. Doesn't matter. Like, it's not better or worse. That's your burden to bear. That's someone else's burden to bear. God relieves all burdens, if you ask. So, but in this case, they're like asking, like, oh, a friend's cousin's mother's all the way exterior, like, fringe, like, I have absolutely no connection with, is, suffering from, like, lost her job, or is, like, can you pray for her? But they're like, if more people can pray, and then more and more, and then, like, we can make this happen kind of slant to it. and about people that like there isn't any immediate connection to, which I don't know if that's like terrible. I'll pray for anybody. Like, I don't care if I have a personal connection, but it was kind of almost seeming as if they were testing, not in a bad way, but like testing God and what he could do. It's like, well, if a lot of people pray for this person, like, will he actually answer that prayer too? I think maybe. Yeah, let's try it. Almost like there's a magic component to it. As opposed to thinking, their old ways of thinking is like, well, we can only pray like in this very confined space of, mental space for a certain amount of people with certain needs at certain times. So they are going like the do opposite direction. Which again, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but it was just like a very interesting pendulum swing where I don't think it's not yet driven, in my opinion, by, oh, I wish to speak with God and I wish to have a relationship with him and talk about the people I interact with every day. I think it's more driven by, I don't know what prayer is, and I'm going to try to do prayer in a new way and see if that conjures up a feeling with me and God. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm making sense, but to fast forward, everything made me really sad because first I'm like, I don't know where those lines are. Like, when does it fall into the category of you think that God is a Santa Claus / you think he just waves a magic wand and like we have power to influence God in his decisions of what to do on earth? Like, I don't believe that, and I don't think that they believe that, but it sometimes the language sounds like it teeters into that direction. But again, it's understandable because I came where they came from, and they came from a place where prayer is a formula that is not there for the relationship between them and God and to foster that sense of peace and trust. Now they're trying to see, like, almost, is God real? That's kind of like what the vibe is. And it's not just this elderly couple. It was another person I knew, and they were talking about stuff, and they had come from a recon church, and now they're in this whole, like, almost seeing God in, like, the minutest details, which, yes, it's a good thing, but at the same time, it almost seems driven by this unquenchable thirst to feel personally connected, and they're like fishing for things that it's just sad because that's not, they shouldn't be in this mental state, but they are because of where they had been. They don't have to test God. God is there. They don't have to experiment with prayer on that level. Like, just pray because you desire to speak with God. Don't pray because you're like wanting to see, like, the more, like, I'm trying to see if prayer is gonna work because I was told it didn't, and now I'm told it does. It's very bizarre. I mean, if you don't get it, I don't either. There's a real relationship crisis between God and the ex-recon and the ex-recon and other people. We just have no idea. Because up until now, we have been told that everything is very materialistic and there's hierarchical materialism where, my desires and feelings don't matter. But, like, now they're like, well, I wish to do this and I am important to God, and so I will do this. And then they won't actually look at the ramifications elsewhere. So it's like, I wish that everybody pray for this person, and, doesn't even matter if, like, just, like, the whole concept of, like, blind faith and leaps of faith in the bad sense as a pendulum swing response to, like, this faith is a calculated, like, mathematical equation, It's, oh man, the road to recovery is hard. Let's just put it that way. So you've got, you start with the 11-year-old who can't even compose something or can't even write a poem, and you can't pray. And then you got all the way through your life to the point where you still don't understand what prayer is. You're getting there, but you're all over the map. Again, what's the point of influencing areas of life if the people who occupy those areas of life that you're influencing don't matter to you. Like, I wish to matter, and I know that I matter to God, but what that looks like was supposed to be fostered in me as I grew up, with my parents as examples of what my Heavenly Father is like to me. But recon kids don't get that. Recon kids grow up and they're all trying to find their own worth and balance it out with, obviously they're not worth anything apart from Christ, but aspects of their humanity should not have been demonized growing up. And that's going to lead me next to a purity culture episode, which, stay freaking tuned, will be next. But for now, I wish to end this episode by saying that Seven Mountains Mandate, Reconstructionism, the Dominion Mandate, they all act like the institutions can better reflect Christ than his image bearers as individuals. Where do you even start with that? Also loosely based on the Abrahamic cover. Also based loosely on the Abrahamic cover. Seven Hills Mandate. That's something else I read about Seven Hills. I said